In the heart of Egypt, an investigation is underway to uncover for the first time the facts about a legendary pharaoh, Tutankhamun.
This is very important to reveal to the world the magic and the mystery of the family of Tutankhamun.
In this episode, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass sets out to discover how Tutankhamun lived and ruled, the boy king who reinvented Egypt.
At the beginning, he was a boy, but he began at the end of his reign to be a strong king.
That's taught as a trainer of the army.
And in the quest to discover how he died, the genetics team find hidden evidence in his DNA that leads to a startling discovery.
Wow! It's a bad result for the king, but it's a very exciting result for us in the lab.
Using new techniques, Dr. Zahi Hawass and his team have already filled in much of King Tut's family tree, tracking down the royal mummies of nearly all his ancestors. His great-grandparents, grandparents, his mother, and his father, the famed Akhenaten. They also proved that Tutankhamun was a father himself. Despite all the questions he's answered, Zahi still needs to solve the mystery of King Tut's life and death.
Every time when I'm alone, I look at his face and I wonder how this boy king lived.
He wants to understand the man behind the golden mask. What kind of pharaoh was he?
He's been characterized as this boy king, manipulated by evil courtiers.
And why did he die so young?
The only thing that we have is hints, rumors. There's nothing that is solid.
The truth has eluded Egyptologists for centuries. But Zahi and his team have a plan. They have strong clues that take them from his birthplace in the ancient city of Amarna to his final resting place in the Valley of the Kings. And every piece of evidence they find, from artifacts, tombs and hieroglyphs, will lead them closer to piecing together the story of King Tut's life and the mystery of his family. One piece of the mystery no one had foreseen was proof that Tutankhamun had descendants as well as ancestors. But King Tut's daughter never lived to continue his dynasty. The remains of their offspring were found in his tomb, given the same gracious treatment as their famous ancestors, carefully and methodically preserved in the way of the royal pharaohs. They were unique, and they continue to be the only mummified fetuses ever discovered in all of Egypt. But Tutankhamun's duties were not only to produce an heir to the throne. He was the head of an ancient superpower, and there are signs that as a ruler, he began to assert himself over the years. Not just a boy king, dependent on his advisors. Zahi and his team believe that King Tut learned on the job and quickly matured into a strong, independent ruler. To test that theory, John Darnell and Colleen Manasseh, experts in Egyptian military history, are on their way to the west bank of the Nile. They're heading to a tomb they hope will shed new light on a key chapter in Tutankhamun's life: the uprising and rebellion in Nubia. Nubia was Egypt's most important subject nation. The ancient Egyptians believed that gold was the skin of the gods, and Nubia was its main source of gold. But during King Tut's early reign, the Nubian tribes were in revolt, threatening Egypt's supply. Keeping Nubia in check took both military strength and diplomacy. Tutankhamun would have to learn quickly. In the Cairo Museum are two shields found in King Tut's tomb. Decorated with cheetah skin and gold, two key products from Nubia, and emblazoned with his name, they symbolize his control over this vital colony. But the team want to find more evidence of the role King Tut actually played in this series of conflicts. So John Darnell and Colleen Manasseh have come to the tomb of Hui, who was Egypt's governor in Nubia. They're hoping to find new information about the Nubian rebellion. They've never been here before, but the first thing they spot is revealing.
Oh my goodness. That's Tiutankhamun right there.
Here he is.
Could the story painted on these walls tell us how Tutankhamun lived and ruled? Was he respected by those who followed him? In a tomb on the west bank of the Nile, Egyptologists Colleen Manasseh and John Darnell are tracking the story of the teenage King Tut as he faced one of the biggest challenges of his young life, the crisis in Nubia.
There's a giraffe.
There's a giraffe.
How he handled it could mark his growth from a boy king into the ruler of an empire. The evidence on the walls shows his early steps were diplomatic. Tutankhamun appointed a governor, Hui.
This is the tomb of Hui, whom we see here receiving his seal of office from King Tutankhamun himself.
In a vivid wall painting, the Nubians pay tribute to Tutankhamun. Piles of gold and precious stones are laid at his feet.
And there are the shields. This is just, it's incredible. It's so well preserved,
really
and the
remarkable.
freshness of the colors.
These are exactly the same shields found buried with Tutankhamun in his tomb.
These shields are interesting because they are tribute from Nubia to Tutankhamun, but they represent Tutankhamun as ruler over Nubia.
And Tutankhamun thought these shields were so important to him that he actually had those shields buried with him in his own tomb.
These are not necessarily just things concocted for Tutankhamun's burials, but that certain of those objects represent very real historical events in Tutankhamun's life.
Even more intriguing, they find key hieroglyphs that suggest King Tut's role went further than diplomacy, and it may have been Tutankhamun himself who marshaled the troops.
There's a very interesting little hymn here, a little pronouncement made by these Egyptians. And what they say is, "O good ruler, brave in training," it seems, "for whom the sun god rises." This seems to be a reference to Tut as a trainer of the army. Now that's something a king would be expected to do.
Even
right?
if he's only 18
Even if
years
he's
old.
a little kid who, hops up on the chariot and rides around. That's the pharaoh training the army.
Exactly.
We do Tut a great disservice by saying because he died young, because he came to the throne rather young, that the Egyptians would have felt sorry for him and seen him as this pathetic figure or something.
The wall paintings confirm that Tutankhamun was far from weak.
Even if he didn't climb into the chariot and ride in battle against the Nubians, he was responsible for this ancient Egyptian military victory.
In fact, as Zahi has always felt, he was becoming a power player.
At the beginning, he was a boy, but he began at the end of his reign to be a strong king on the age of 19. And we can see from the scenes on the tombs and the objects that he was really a good, strong king.
Tutankhamun was the last of a line of warrior pharaohs. He would have begun target practice as soon as he was able. Every armed conflict for a pharaoh was considered a holy war against the forces of chaos. And they believed the power of the gods guided their arrows. Zahi is now piecing together the image of a much more active pharaoh. An outdoorsman who was skilled in the art of war.
If we go back 3,000 years ago, we can imagine that the area next door to the Sphinx was green, princes was riding horses, running after the wild animals, and that was a perfect place for King Tut to hunt wild animals.
The Great Sphinx at Giza, built over 4,000 years ago. During King Tut's reign, the Sphinx and the pyramids were already considered ancient monuments, and the plains around them would have been the favorite hunting grounds of the pharaohs.
I think King Tut had a passion for the desert of Memphis. He loved to hunt wild animals.
Tutankhamun built a hunting lodge here at Giza. Like his ancestors before him, the young pharaoh would ride his chariot here, on the hunt for animals like lions and gazelle. Echoing his hunting skills, Tutankhamun was buried with over 50 bows and hundreds of arrows. Also in his tomb were 6 chariots, and they were not just ornamental. John Darnell and Colleen Manasseh have come to the museum at Luxor to examine one of these chariots.
If you look closely at these segments of the outer tire, you can see considerable evidence of wear. Impressions, little nicks have been chopped out in a number of places. So at least some of these segments had seen some relatively heavy use, it looks like.
So we can say, based on our examination of this wheel, that Tutankhamun put some miles on this chariot.
These chariots were not primitive carts. They were at the cutting edge of Egyptian engineering. Fast, stable, easy to maneuver. There's more evidence on the underside.
You can see how simple really this whole concept is, to transfer the power of the horses through this central element to the very rear of the chariot with the wheels. So it really gives you the maximum turning ability at a high speed. It's really just this perfect line between stability and flexibility and speed.
These chariots set the pharaohs apart. The wheels were ahead of their time, with a hub greased with animal fat to reduce friction, and the addition of replaceable elements.
There's an inner wheel and an outer wheel, and the outer wheel can be replaced then,
So
even by segments.
So we actually have a wooden replaceable tire on the outside of the
Because
wheel.
that's the part that's going to take the major wearing.
All in all, it was a wonder of ancient technology. Easy to steer, built for speed, and designed for use by one of the most famous pharaohs in Egypt. But the skills needed by a warrior king were more than target practice and chariot rides. And as King Tut grew into the pharaoh's role, he had to undertake the pharaoh's duties. Tradition dictated a precise list.
For the king to be a god, he had to do 13 things in his life: building temples for the gods, giving offering to the gods, and also unification of the two lands, and smiting the enemies of Egypt.
High on that list of 13 was leading the army into battle. Tutankhamun might have been too young to fight with the army in Nubia, but evidence is emerging that he may have had more opportunities to fulfill this sacred duty. At Luxor, 40,000 stone blocks have been discovered over the last century. Among them, carvings depicting a heated battle on Egypt's northern border. Dated to the final years of King Tut's reign, they raise an intriguing question. Did he actually lead the Egyptian army into battle? Ray Johnson is the archaeologist in charge.
Again, let's just think right in proximity to this. We're still finding the blocks. We haven't found them all yet. not wait for us.
Johnson leads them to the area where he thinks the important blocks might be.
Look, 'cause it's in the other end of the block yard.
Finally, they find them.
Wow, the amount of movement in these battle reliefs is phenomenal.
That's pretty incredible.
A series of images showing a pitched battle between the Egyptians and their longtime enemies, the Hittites. They're full of graphic detail.
And this appears to be the third man of the chariot crew who's literally been blown out of the chariot by one of the Egyptian arrows. He's all spread-eagled like that. That's a very specific detail. It's one of those little things that takes this out of the realm of generic and makes it look very specific.
John and Colleen are convinced these blocks are not just royal propaganda, but an early form of war reporting.
The level of detail suggests that these represent an actual battle fought at the end of the reign of Tutankhamun.
And they believe they know exactly what battle that was.
These blocks appear to depict the Egyptian armies fighting a northeastern enemy, an Asiatic enemy, probably around the city of Kadesh in northwestern Syria.
Kadesh was a strategic city, constantly changing hands between the Egyptians and the Hittites.
So Egypt is here, and we have the coast of the Levant here, and Anatolia, the seat of the Hittites, to the north. During the reign of Akhenaten and the reign of Tutankhamun, there is a little buffer state here on the Syrian coast that prevents the Egyptians and the Hittites from being able to come to blows directly with each other. However, if they go around the outside of this little buffer state into this no man's land to the east, they could, in fact, come into conflict. And that is exactly where we find Kadesh.
But Darnell and Manasseh need evidence that Tutankhamun was actually there. Did the same youth who hunted lions hunt Egypt's enemies as well? On a small block nearby, they find a chariot with larger wheels than the others.
On this small block is actually a representation of King Tutankhamun's chariot within the Asiatic battle scene. You can see that he has the same six-spoked chariot wheel, but this wheel is larger in scale than the other chariots in the scene.
A large wheel is a sign of the pharaoh's chariot. The young king rides into combat, and a Hittite soldier falls beneath his wheels. It's a brand new image of King Tut. On the verge of battle, a warrior king prepares. An ancient Egyptian text evokes the moment before combat. Stand firm, steady your heart. I will charge them as a falcon. I will slaughter and destroy them, bringing them to the ground. If he fought in the battle, he would have been young, but no younger than Alexander the Great, or soldiers today in their first combat. Hittite records confirm that Tutankhamun's army was victorious. But did he lead the victory? Zahi is searching for more proof of Tutankhamun's personal involvement in the battle. He's in Saqqara, a vast ancient burial ground near Memphis. Here his team has unearthed a stone block that could carry the proof he's looking for.
This block has been found underneath some of the houses in the area of Saqqara. And what we can see, the only scene of King Tut outside of his tomb that showing King Tut smiting an enemy. Look at this, King Tut smiting the enemies of Egypt. I think this is from Syria, Palestine.
For Zahi, it all adds up. A battle at the right time in the right place, with King Tut in action.
Scholars believe that King Tut himself, as a young man, went in one of these wars.
If Zahi is right, then the young Tutankhamun could well have witnessed the battle at Kadesh firsthand, and would have had the chance to lead the charge. For the investigators, the involvement of King Tut and the timing of the conflict near the end of his life poses an intriguing possibility.
Since the battle appears to have occurred shortly before he died, he certainly would have been old enough to have launched a respectable chariot charge in person. So there really is no reason to think he didn't.
Have the archaeologists answered the final question: how Tutankhamun died? The last chapter of King Tut's life is the most mysterious of all. The boy king was a boy no more. Zahi Hawass and his team have unearthed compelling evidence that Tutankhamun was a strong, independent ruler who might well have led his army into battle. The young pharaoh was coming into his own. Then suddenly, he vanishes from the historical record.
He was in the age of 19, a very strong, powerful man, but suddenly an accident maybe happened to him and he died. How he died, it's still to us is a mystery.
Ever since the tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered, Egyptologists have puzzled over King Tut's death. What happened? Why did he die so young? X-rays show that Tutankhamun has a hole in the back of his head that could point towards murder.
Everyone thought before that he was killed because of that hole in the back of the head. But we found out that that hole existed in Dynasty 18 to put the liquid for mummification.
So to find out how he died, Zahi returns to the Valley of the Kings for one last meeting with Tutankhamun. He's hoping that the record of King Tut's final days may be written in his physical remains. Almost everything surrounding King Tut's death is mysterious. For instance, the positioning of his arms and hands is unusual for a pharaoh.
All the kings of Dynasty 18, the two arms are on the chest like this. But you can see with the mummy of Tiutankhamun, the two arms are in the side. It's different from any other king.
Even more unusual, his heart is missing.
We found out that the heart of King Tut is not inside the body. The heart is a place of knowledge. The ancient Egyptians should leave the heart inside because this is the guide for the afterlife.
What's more, a CAT scan of his skull reveals a strange anomaly. It was embalmed on 2 different occasions, using 2 different resins injected at different times.
Big question for me is why they filled in 2 times resin into this brain, into the skull. This is completely unusual, and there must be a reason for it.
To Zahi, it suggests that King Tut died suddenly, far away from home, and his body was hastily coated in resin to preserve it for the journey back to Thebes.
It can preserve the body, like what you do today by putting the body of the dead inside a refrigerator. All this strange thing about this mummy can tell us one thing. King Tut died suddenly.
So it looks like he suffered a sudden death. But what caused it? When Tutankhamun's mummy was originally scanned, the team noticed a severe fracture just above his left knee.
But the issue is, we are sure there's a trauma, but what type of trauma was that? Was it a hard or a sharp or a blunt or whatever?
The break is vicious looking.
Something
like
which has
that.
a kind of edge and
Yeah.
like a stone, or also a step of a stair.
Yeah.
Something
Okay,
like
this is blunt, okay, but
Yeah.
it has an edge.
A compound fracture. It bears the hallmarks of sharp, sudden violence.
Not only the bones are fractured and injured, but also the soft tissues around the bone are injured and the skin is cut.
Unlike other breaks on this body, it's clear this one happened before King Tut died. Tiny signs of inflammation are evidence. The surrounding tissue had just begun to heal.
Maybe compared to this part.
But no one knows precisely what caused this fracture, or exactly how it fits into a clear picture of his death. There are widespread theories suggesting King Tut died in combat, leading his army on a distant battlefield like Kadesh.
Because this Asiatic battle occurred towards the end of the reign of Tutankhamun, we can't rule out the possibility that his injury was actually sustained when he was in battle.
Dying in battle, far from home, might explain the leg break and the two resins. One applied when he died, the other later, back home. But Zahi thinks that King Tut's untimely death is more likely to be the result of an accident while hunting.
I don't think that he died in a battle at all. I really think that the possible evidence that we have right now can really show to me that he died or he did fell from his chariot while he was hunting wild animals.
Tutankhamun's favorite hunting ground near Memphis was a 400-mile journey down the Nile from the Valley of the Kings.
They had to transport his body, and that's another reason that maybe it was long time to be moved from Memphis to Luxor. They had to put resin on his body until they bring it to the workshop for mummification at Thebes.
A chariot built for speed in the hands of a teenage pharaoh in the midst of a chase. Perhaps Tutankhamun lost control and was thrown from his chariot. A tragic accident in the desert of Giza. But new clues have been uncovered that may rewrite the history of King Tut's final days by the investigations of Zahi's scientific team. In Germany, the team of radiologists has been poring over the CAT scans of Tutankhamun's body, trying to find any clues about his cause of death. Dr. Paul Gosner observes something peculiar about one of the feet, something no one's ever noticed before.
Yeah, but here it's missing. Most of it is missing. We don't have
A piece of the second toe is missing,
similar.
and near it, there's an even bigger problem.
There is something wrong here. Something that is not symmetrical with the healthy side. Here, all what you have is fragments.
Tutankhamun's foot was badly damaged, the bones deteriorating in the ball of the foot.
This is an important finding, huh?
Yeah.
The necrosis is located right here.
It's a brand new discovery, osteonecrosis, bone death. Tutankhamun had a crumbling foot, so Gosner and the team have to figure out when the damage occurred and what it means.
And you think this osteonecrosis then appeared somehow later, or just...
I think in this case 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
So not...
And
just quite close to his death.
King Tut had a congenital malformation of the toe and a destructive disease of the foot that came on late in his life.
At this stage, I think it's almost impossible to put some weight on the foot. It hurts too much. So I think he has to avoid it as much as possible in this stage. You need a stick.
This surprising find may answer an archaeological question, one that's puzzled Egyptologists for nearly a century. It's an historic fact that all pharaohs had ceremonial staffs. But Tutankhamun is buried with the largest collection of staffs ever found in a pharaoh's tomb, 130 in all. Some scholars believe they were purely ornamental. In the handles were carvings that allowed Tutankhamun to literally crush his enemies.
By putting the enemies in the place of the crook, so that when the king holds them, they're bent back, it's a visual enactment to break the back of the foreign lands, to bend back the foreigners. If the king actually leaned on it even a little bit, the pressure that he might put on it, you magically push down those enemies.
Others believe they were used as weapons in hunting or in self-defense. But could they simply have been walking sticks? Zahi is now betting they were more than ceremonial, and that Tutankhamun needed them to take the weight off his crumbling foot.
No one really ever explained why King Tut has all these sticks. But never at all any scientist found exactly what is the cause, why King Tut has 130 sticks.
One by one, he examines the ends of the sticks for evidence that King Tut may have used them while walking.
I can really see this type of sticks that can actually be used by the king.
The ends are worn down.
That is the accurate evidence that this stick actually was used by King Tut.
It's unmistakable proof that King Tut used them to help himself walk. One of the sticks even appears to have been carved out of a Nile reed by King Tut himself.
It seems that this stick was very special to King Tut. Found on it inscriptions that say that King Tut, or His Majesty by himself, did cut this stick from reeds. For sure, King Tut used these sticks.
Forensics and archaeology together have resolved a question that neither could have solved independently. So now it's evident King Tut needed these sticks to support his damaged foot. A vital young pharaoh, trained in the art of warfare, who drove a chariot and hunted wild animals. A proud young man struggling with a debilitating problem. Perhaps he was forced to push himself to the limit, trying to overcome a physical disadvantage, taking risks, wanting to make his mark as a golden pharaoh. For the radiology team, the discovery of King Tut's deformed foot has changed our image of Tutankhamun.
It gives us completely new insight, because it's nothing unusual that people with this kind of pathology are tumbling and falling down.
Perhaps the painful foot could have caused King Tut to fall in battle, or while hunting, or even walking in the temple of Amun. And this is how he broke his leg. Whatever the reason, he died soon afterward. But would a broken leg have caused Tutankhamun's death? Many people break their legs and don't die. The investigation turned to the research of the genetics team to see if their continued analysis of Tutankhamun's DNA can solve this mystery once and for all. Yahya Zachariah and Karsten Pusch decide on further tests that will help to clarify how he died.
The only thing that we have gathered so far is hints, rumors. There's nothing that is solid.
They decide to investigate the DNA of ancient diseases and the most virulent infections of the time.
It is possible to test for these diseases, so we will carry on and we will know in the end.
It's the same process used to isolate human DNA. One by one, they test for any fatal diseases known to have been present in ancient times.
That is great news.
What they find is incredible.
So we have several samples and all of them are ancient. Wow!
Tutankhamun died at the young age of 19. What we don't know is how he died. It's a question that's remained unanswered since his discovery. Scholars thought he may have been killed in a hunting accident, mortally wounded in battle against the Hittites, or even murdered. But the forensics team have uncovered new clues from CAT scans of King Tut's body, revealing a deformity in his foot, which could have made him more vulnerable on the battlefield and in life. And now DNA analysis has confirmed the presence of another, more deadly enemy.
Perfect. So this is the replication data, and so we can sure about this. This is not only the
It's a
first
breakthrough
appearance
in the investigation of Tutankhamun's death.
So this is what we
The
need
new
for-
evidence historians have been looking for.
You're looking at a wonderful result. So this is the DNA of King Tut that was tested for a specific pathogen. And this is evidence, that he had malaria. This is a PCR band from a Plasmodium pathogen. And this turned out to be positive, several times. So there's no doubt King Tut was suffering from malaria.
Malaria. The team can tell not only that Tutankhamun had the disease, but what type. It's called P. falciparum, the deadliest of all malarias.
This one is causing the severe form of malaria. So this is really life-threatening, especially under demanding living conditions. So you're becoming weak, and you will probably die. Because this is a possible reason of death.
This strain is known as cerebral malaria. It attacks the brain, often causing convulsions, coma, and death. Even today, it still kills about 2 million people a year.
You don't have to worry about these parts here. But this is a bad result for the king, but it's a very exciting result for us in the lab.
It can kill a person in a few days, or it can take many years.
So actually we are speaking about a scary scenario for a young man. I don't think that his last days were really happy.
For Zahi, the discovery of malaria connects the dots on yet another archaeological riddle that has puzzled him for years. Containers full of seeds found in Tutankhamun's tomb, their purpose unknown.
One of the most interesting things that Howard Carter discovered in the tomb of King Tut was really all this type of seeds.
There are dozens, and amongst them, Hawass finds exactly what he's looking for.
This one. This one is called coriander seed. And coriander seeds, according to physicians, it reduces the fever. And that can tell us that he used it in his lifetime, and he wanted to use it also in the afterlife because he had this fever.
So Tutankhamun was buried with medicine for malaria, to take with him to the afterlife. But was it malaria alone that killed him? To weigh up the evidence, Zahi meets with Doctors Push and Ashraf.
And King Tut.
What do you think, after we are sure now that he was not murdered by that hole in the back of the head, what do you think how he died now?
How he died.
Do you think the malaria could affect him?
It could be the malaria, because it's the worst form of malaria. The one is called malaria tropica. And it can turn into a malaria maligna.
It's a bad malaria.
It's the worst malaria form you can ever have.
Although we could, if you remember, that we could demonstrate a fracture in his left femur, both could represent a cause of death.
I think your discovery that King Tut has this severe malaria, with the fracture that you found, it could really confirm that King Tut died because of this.
Absolutely, I think so, because it's a threat to the immune system anyway,
It's a danger for the whole body, and if you have more than one disease, it's accumulating.
So for the young king, it would be a deadly combination. Whatever the circumstances, we now know that in his last days, King Tut suffered from a deteriorating foot, a badly broken leg, and the most severe form of malaria there is. He was a pharaoh in the prime of his life. His years on earth bound by the constraints of disease and deformity. His attempts to become a father had failed, and with his death, the reign of his family came to an end. Sadly, Tutankhamun never realized that the love that had created the stillborn children between him and his sister was the very thing that doomed them.
It's a pity, because they thought they do the right thing, by somehow purifying the lineage, by having brothers and sisters, marriages. But we now know that it causes the opposite. So the problem with this was, they made it worse.
For Tiutankhamun, all hopes of a family with her beloved brother were over.
This was the reason that the dynasty ended. All the accumulation of the negative effects, the loss of the genetic fitness in the family, and that they didn't have a progeny in the end because the fetuses died. This was the end of the dynasty.
The golden boy died. He died suddenly. Everyone was so upset and sad, and everyone had to prepare for his funeral.
During his 10-year reign, the boy king had blossomed into a strong and independent ruler beloved by his people.
The high priest came, had in his hand the most precious object, the golden mask, and he put it on the face of the mummy. And the magical text that they wrote here, they know when they leave the tomb that the ka and the soul of the king will come to take the king to go to the field of paradise.
Tutankhamun, one of the most famous pharaohs in Egypt. His name still known around the world 3,300 years after his death. Finally, the mystery of his life is solved, and the pieces of the jigsaw fit together to produce a picture of an influential family. His grandfather, Amenhotep III, whose reign brought great prosperity to Egypt. His father, the radical pharaoh Akhenaten, who decreed a new religion. Completing, for the first time, Tutankhamun's direct male lineage. DNA analysis also helped to discover his grandmother, Queen Tai, and proved the younger woman from tomb KV35 was his mother. And the final revelation, that the tiny mummified babies discovered in his tomb were his own flesh and blood. Tutankhamun's family will never be forgotten.
This is a happy moment in my life. With all of these discoveries, I don't think that the magic of King Tut will be gone. No, it will continue more, because King Tut captured the hearts of everyone.
Next week, 5 explores the discovery of a burial place in Jerusalem believed to be that of Jesus and his family. Secrets of the Jesus tomb, next Wednesday at 8 here on 5. Next tonight, Abby gets out of her lab for once. NCIS in just a tick.